Okay, let's jump right in. We've got some really exciting news from the solar energy world today.
Definitely. It looks like a pretty significant step forward.
Yeah, so this deep dive, we're looking at a potential breakthrough, something that could really shift how and, maybe more importantly, where we use solar power.
That's right. We're digging into a new scientific paper and some related reports, too, that lay out this new research.
And our goal here is, to understand what they've actually achieved, why it's such a big deal, and maybe peek into what it could mean down the road.
For solar and maybe for the environment, too.
Exactly, because the core problem they're tackling here is, well, it's the less sunny side of solar power, right?
Yeah.
The environmental impact.
It is. I mean, current solar tech, the silicon panels you see everywhere, even the newer perovskite cells, they're getting better and better at generating electricity.
Yeah.
But they come with some baggage. Silicon panels, for instance, use materials that make disposal and recycling kind of difficult and, frankly, expensive.
Right, not exactly straightforward.
Not at all. And perovskites, while they're really efficient, often rely on things like lead compounds. So again, you have these concerns about toxicity and what happens at the end of their life. Long-term sustainability questions.
So the hunt has been on for something cleaner, more sustainable.
Precisely. And that's where these all-organic solar cells, or OSCs, come into the picture.
All organic. What does that actually mean in this context?
It means they're film-type cells, flexible, and made entirely from carbon-based materials. Think organic polymers, like specialized plastics almost.
Okay, so the big advantage is?
No toxic heavy metals, that's the key. The source material really highlights this. They can apparently be incinerated safely at the end of their life, just like regular plastics.
Wow, okay, so that deals with the whole end-of-life disposal headache.
It potentially does, yes.
Yeah.
Much more environmentally friendly across the whole life cycle.
Okay, sounds great. But there's always a catch, isn't there? What's been the holdup with these organic cells?
Efficiency. That's been the major hurdle. Despite being green, their ability to convert sunlight into electricity, their power conversion efficiency, or PCE, it was just low.
How low were we talking?
Like around 4%, maybe a touch more in some cases, but yeah, low single digits.
Ouch. Okay. Compared to silicon at, what, mid-20s%? And perovskites are up there, too.
Exactly. Silicon's pushing past 27% in labs, perovskites over 26%, so 4%. It just wasn't practical for most energy needs.
Right. You'd need acres of the stuff, so there's been this big push to make them better.
A huge push. How do we get that efficiency up without losing the environmental benefits?
And that brings us right to the core finding, the sort of aha moment in this research we're looking at.
Yes, they've done it. Scientists have managed a breakthrough.
Don't bury the lead. What did they achieve?
They have more than doubled the power conversion efficiency of these all-organic cells.
More than doubled. Seriously.
Seriously. So from that roughly 4% baseline we were talking about,
Yeah.
they've now demonstrated 8.7% efficiency.
8.7. Okay, wow. That's a significant jump.
It's a massive leap in this specific field.
Still a way off from silicon, obviously, but hitting nearly 9%. That changes things, doesn't it? It starts to make them seem, well, usable for certain things.
Absolutely. It makes them much more viable, particularly for applications where maybe you don't need the absolute highest power output. But things like flexibility, low weight, and environmental impact are really critical.
Okay, so how? How did they manage this? What were the technical nuts they had to crack?
Well, the sources point to two main challenges that were holding back previous all-organic cells.
Okay, challenge number one.
Finding the right stuff for the electrodes, specifically the transparent electrode you need to let light in. It needed to be organic, obviously, to keep it all organic, highly conductive, suitable for flexible films.
And the tricky part.
And crucially, you couldn't damage the delicate organic layers underneath when you were making it.
Ah, right. These organic layers are sensitive.
Very sensitive. Some existing conductive organic materials worked okay, but making them often involved harsh chemicals like strong acids or bases or really high temperatures. We're talking about over 150 degrees Celsius.
Which would just wreck the other parts of the cell.
Exactly. It could damage the substrate, the semiconducting layers, basically the very things doing the work.
So they needed a gentler way to make a good, transparent, organic electrode.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Lower temperature, no harsh chemicals. And that's what this team developed.
What did they use?
They created a transparent electrode using a conductive polymer called PTOT.PSS. You can think of it as a kind of conductive plastic.
Okay. And the key benefit?
They figured out how to fabricate it at just 80 degrees Celsius, much lower. And importantly, without needing those acids or bases.
Nice. And it works well enough conductive enough.
Apparently so. The paper mentions it achieves a sheet resistance below 70 ohms per square.
Which, in layman's terms.
Means electricity flows across it pretty easily. Good enough for these kinds of thin film devices.
Okay, so that's one problem down. A low-temp, gentle electrode process. What was challenge number 2?
The second issue was how you actually build the cell, stacking all the different thin layers on top of each other, especially when you're using solution-based methods like printing layers from an ink.
Right, like painting layers.
Sort of. The problem was the solvent or ink used to put down a new layer could actually dissolve or damage the organic layer just beneath it.
Ah, okay. So building the stack was messing up the lower levels. Not good.
Not good at all. It limited the overall performance you could get.
So how do they fix that?
They came up with a different approach, a lamination method. And this involves using carbon nanotubes for the other electrode.
Carbon nanotubes. Okay, interesting. So how does laminating help?
Well, instead of trying to deposit that carbon nanotube electrode directly onto the sensitive layers using a potentially damaging solution,
Yeah.
they actually make the carbon nanotube electrodes separately. They form it on a temporary barrier film first.
Off to the side, basically.
Exactly. And then they carefully attach or laminate this pre-made electrode onto the rest of the solar cell device.
Ah, clever. So you completely avoid putting those damaging solvents anywhere near the sensitive organic layers during that step.
That's the idea. It bypasses that whole layer damage problem for the electrode fabrication.
So is the combination then, the new low-temp PSS electrode plus this carbon nanotube lamination technique?
Yes. According to the research, bringing those two innovations together is what allowed them to achieve that jump to 8.7% efficiency.
That's really neat, solving two distinct problems to get this synergistic boost.
It seems to be a really crucial step. It moves these high-performance, all-organic cells much closer to being, a practical technology.
So where might we actually see these things being used now that they're, well, significantly better?
The researchers highlighted a few potential areas. One is in environmentally sensitive locations.
Like what?
Like farmland, for example. Imagine integrating solar collection right into agricultural areas.
Okay, but wait. Does 8.7% efficiency make sense on farmland? Wouldn't you need huge areas compared to, say, silicon panels on a barn roof?
That's a really good point, and definitely a consideration. The trade-off is, potentially lower power density versus the huge environmental benefit. No risk of heavy metals leaching into the soil if a panel gets damaged.
Right. Zero contamination risk. That could be a big deal in agriculture.
It could. And maybe the flexibility allows for integration in ways we haven't thought of yet. Plus, large area roll-to-roll manufacturing might eventually make the cost per area lower, even if the efficiency isn't peak.
Okay, interesting trade-off. What other applications did they mention?
Wearable devices. That's another one.
That makes sense. Because these are flexible films, right? Lightweight.
Exactly. Ideal for putting solar power into clothing, backpacks, maybe small gadgets where a rigid, heavy silicon panel just wouldn't work.
Or even just on curved surfaces where standard panels are awkward.
Yes, places like building facades, vehicle bodies, anywhere conventional panels are impractical.
But what about that lamination step? Does adding that make things more complex or potentially more expensive to manufacture?
That's definitely one of the hurdles they'll need to clear moving forward. Scaling up. Proving a technique works in the lab is one thing.
Yeah.
Making it efficient and cheap enough for mass production is the next big challenge. They've shown the potential. Now comes the optimization.
Makes sense. And I assume they're not stopping at 8.7%. What's next for the research?
No, they definitely want to push it higher. The source material specifically mentions they plan to work on improving the conductivity of the organic electrodes even further.
Trying to squeeze out more performance.
That seems to be a key focus. Better electrodes usually mean better overall cell efficiency. This work gives them a solid platform to build on.
So to kind of wrap up the core story here, it's a big lead for all organic solar cells. They've more than doubled the efficiency, up to 8.7%.
Right, by solving two key problems. One, with making a gentle, low-temperature, transparent electrode.
Using that PADOT.PSS stuff.
Exactly. And the other, with a clever lamination technique, using carbon nanotubes to avoid damaging the delicate layers during assembly.
It's still not competing head-to-head with silicon on pure power yet.
Not yet, no.
But this breakthrough makes clean, flexible, safely disposable solar a much more realistic prospect for specific uses. Think farmland, wearables, curved surfaces, places where traditional solar doesn't fit well.
It really represents a significant step toward making that environmentally friendly vision a practical reality.
Which naturally leads us to a final thought for you, the listener. Think about this. What happens when or if these efficiencies get even higher? Imagine flexible organic cells eventually catching up to silicon or perovskites. How could that fundamentally change where and how we deploy solar? We're talking about moving beyond just rooftops and dedicated farms.
Towards potentially integrating power generation invisibly into, well, almost anything. Everyday objects, buildings, infrastructure.
Exactly, truly embedding it. But alongside that vision, what are the big scaling challenges? How do we get from lab breakthrough to widespread affordable reality? Something to ponder.